8. Alberto and Jesus Salgado. In September 2022, police discovered a flaming truck in Merced, California. Around the same time, the family of the vehicle's owner, Amandeep Singh, reported him and 3 others missing. Singh had mysteriously vanished with his infant niece and the child's parents, Jasleen Cowell and Jasdeep Singh. Surveillance footage from the family's trucking business showed an armed man forcing all 4 victims into a pickup while their hands were bound. The video also revealed that there were 2 possible suspects involved in the kidnapping. Nothing seemed to be stolen from the business, ruling out robbery as a motive, and detectives started investigating any possible grudges someone may have had against the family. Relatives of a disgruntled former employee, 48-year-old Jesus Salgado, suspected his involvement and quickly called the police. By the time officers went to Salgado's home to question him, he had tried to take his own life. He was quickly rushed to the hospital and survived the attempt. A relative of the victims told authorities that Salgado was caught up in a long-standing feud with the family after they fired him. Shortly after his arrest, a farmhand discovered the victim's remains in a remote almond orchard, about 30 miles or 50 kilometers from where they first disappeared. Salgado now faces 4 counts of first-degree murder. His brother, Alberto, was later identified as the 2nd suspect in the surveillance footage and faces charges of conspiracy to commit robbery, accessory after the fact, and arson. Law enforcement declined to provide specifics on the nature of his involvement in the disturbing crime. 7. Gitchi Manito murders. One evening in 1973, Sandra Chesky, her boyfriend, 17-year-old Roger SM, and 3 of their friends, Michael Hadrath and brothers Dana and Stuart Badd, had an overnight camping trip at Iowa's Gitchi Manito State Preserve. They were relaxing around a campfire when 3 men suddenly ambushed them, claiming to be narcotics officers. The terrified teens cooperated with the trio's commands and stayed still while Sandra was forced into a truck at gunpoint. They drove away, and the 2 suspects still at the scene killed the rest of the captives. Sandra endured hours of torture at the hands of her captor, who took her to an abandoned farmhouse to murder her. But she somehow talked him out of it. At first, law enforcement found it strange that Sandra escaped, and they suspected she might have been involved in the murders. They soon realized that she was truly traumatized, though, and shifted their focus elsewhere. Unfortunately, Sandra's classmates and other community members were less convinced of her innocence and harassed her throughout the investigation. After failing to identify the suspects, police drove all over the area in search of the farmhouse Sandra described, hoping it would help lead them to answers. They finally recognized it 10 days after the murders, as one of the suspects pulled into the driveway. Officers arrested him and later caught the other suspects, who were identified as brothers Alan James and David Fryer. On the night of the murders, David was serving jail time, but was out on a work release program. He called the facility pretending to be his boss and said he was staying for a double shift, then went to Gitchi Manito with Alan and James. They were poaching deer before discovering the teens and deciding, for reasons that remain unclear, to carry out their disturbing crimes. All 3 Allen brothers were convicted of the murders and are now serving life sentences without parole. 6. Roni and Josue Castaneda Ramirez. When nobody recognized 2 young men at Joe Melgoza's wedding reception in Chino, California in 2019, the 30-year-old newlywed kicked them out. They returned toward the end of the night and confronted Melgoza in an alley outside. The wedding crashers then assaulted Melgoza and 2 of his guests with a bat. By the time police arrived, Melgoza and his attackers had disappeared. Officers found the victim in a backyard nearby, suffering from blunt force trauma to the head. He died from his injuries. and the suspects, brothers Roni and Josue Castaneda Ramirez, were handed murder charges. Melgoza's brother, Andy Velasquez, told the Washington Post that the night was going well when the brothers showed up. At first, the groom assumed someone must have invited them, even though he had no clue who they were. But it eventually became clear that nobody knew them, at which point they were told to leave. Law enforcement declined to elaborate on the crime's specifics, including how they found the suspects, the nature of the altercation before the attack, or a possible motive. The current status of the case is unclear as well. 5. Alan and Alex Stokes. Twin brothers, Alan and Alex Stokes, rose to social media fame for filming elaborate pranks and posting on YouTube. They run one of the world's most viewed YouTube channels and have over 30 million TikTok followers. In 2020, the pair recorded themselves trying to get into an Uber while wearing ski masks and black clothes. They also had duffel bags in their hands, as if they had just robbed a bank. Unaware that it was a prank, the driver wouldn't take them anywhere. In the meantime, witnesses called 911 under the impression that the twins had committed a robbery and were trying to carjack the Uber. Irvine police rushed to the scene with their guns drawn. They were kind enough to let the brothers off with a warning, but the pair live-streamed another fake bank robbery just a few hours later. Months passed before Orange County District Attorney Todd Spitzer decided to move forward with serious charges of falsely reporting an emergency and false imprisonment affected by violence, menace, fraud, or deceit. In a statement, Spitzer denounced the idea that the stunts were harmless pranks, and he accused Alan and Alex of senselessly putting law enforcement officers in danger in a twisted attempt to gain more popularity on the internet. The twins, who are now 26 years old, pled guilty to a reduced misdemeanor charge and were only given probation. They were ordered to stop making YouTube videos depicting criminal behavior and to perform 160 hours of community service each. 4. Michael and Patrick Poland. While driving in Arizona along Interstate 17 in 1977, two armored car guards, Russell Dempsey and Cecil Newkirk, were pulled over. Two men posing as police officers ordered them to open their truck. They complied, and the phony cops made off with a whopping $228,000 in cash. The couriers never returned, but also never sent out a distress call or tripped the van's siren. Investigators quickly ruled them out as suspects after learning that they had no financial problems or any other major issues in their lives. Their armored van was soon found in the middle of the desert with its radio on. The FBI appealed to the public for information, and several witnesses reported seeing the van during a traffic stop. The Arizona Department of Public Safety said that none of its officers pulled the vehicle over, confirming that the suspects were acting as cops. In the months after their disappearance, Dempsey and Newkirk's bodies were found in canvas bags 300 miles, 483 kilometers north in Lake Mead. A third canvas bag contained more evidence, including a few personal belongings, and a local business owner identified one of the suspects, Michael Poland, in a photo lineup of suspects. Investigators discovered that Michael had just bought a new motorcycle and had trouble holding a steady job. He didn't have much money either. His brother Patrick just bought a new car too. Both of them had recently paid off all their debts, and there was no legal or logical explanation for the sudden spending splurge. The suspects' narratives quickly fell apart during questioning, and they were both eventually convicted of murdering Dempsey and Newkirk. They each received the death penalty. Michael was executed by lethal injection in 1999, and Patrick's execution happened 9 months later. 3. Rob, Dale, and Harry Rogers. Violent crime was practically unheard of in the small, close-knit town of Ladysmith, Wisconsin, so the community was shaken to the core when 27-year-old Rob Fail was found face down on the ground with a bullet wound in 1979. someone had shot the well-liked college student in the head, execution style, while he walked home from his neighbor's house with a jug of milk in his hands. Investigators discovered that Fale was recently caught up in a dispute with local district attorney Bob Rogers. The two men knew each other, but their friendship turned sour when Rogers asked Fale to sell drugs for him. Fale refused, and Rogers couldn't take no for an answer. When Fale's dogs escaped their cages one day, Rogers ordered sheriff's deputies to shoot them, and they did. The victim then threatened to expose the DA's criminal dark side, and soon turned up dead. Authorities didn't have enough solid evidence to pin the murder on Rogers, who they believed hired someone else to do the job. The disgraced prosecutor moved to California and took his own life in 1984, after having involvement in another murder. At one point, the ex-wife of Rogers' brothers came forward and told detectives that the DA's 3 siblings had carried out the killing. But the information was inadmissible in court due to marital privilege, and the investigation stayed at a standstill. The case passed through the hands of several prosecutors before newly elected DA Kathleen Pakes gave it another look after the urging of Fale's father in 2000. 4 years later, 25 years after Fale's murder, Rogers' brother, Harry John Rogers, confessed to being the shooter. He implicated 2 other Rogers brothers, Dale and Mike, for their alleged roles in the crime as well. Harry said Rob had told them Fale was out to get him and persuaded them to kill the victim first. A jury convicted Harry of first-degree murder, and he was sentenced to serve out life in prison with the possibility of parole. Dale pleaded guilty to solicitation of second-degree murder and served a little over a year. Authorities declined to press charges against Mike Rogers in exchange for his help against Harry and Dale. 2. Matt and Noah Colvin. During the days of panicked stockpiling of basic supplies in 2020's COVID-19 pandemic outbreak, 36-year-old Matt Colvin and his 21-year-old brother Noah bought thousands of bottles of hand sanitizer and antibacterial wipes to sell on Amazon at inflated prices. The price-gouging pair, who live near Chattanooga, Tennessee, spent thousands accumulating a stash of 17,700 bottles of hand sanitizer. But they weren't worried about the outlandish cost, since they were charging well over the price of what the supplies were going for on store shelves, and people were buying from them. The brothers made the mistake of sharing their business scheme with the New York Times, telling the news outlet that they had resold about 300 bottles of sanitizer at prices ranging somewhere between $7 and $70 each. As soon as the story broke out, Amazon pulled items that were being sold for outrageous prices, including the Colvin stock. In the meantime, the two received death threats and other hateful messages from angry consumers who felt like they were taken advantage of during a dangerous and scary time. A week after the brothers made headlines, then-President Donald Trump signed an executive order tasking the Justice Department with investigating COVID-related price gouging and hoarding. Tennessee state authorities arrested Matt and Noah, who were quick to cooperate once they realized they were in trouble. They avoided a price gouging fine and restitution by donating the remaining supplies, and they also agreed not to continue their business practices. The case was resolved quickly, and the sanitizer and wipes were given to the Colvin's church for distribution for use by first responders. 1. Orlando Romero and Christopher Self. For a 2-month period starting in October 1992, brothers Orlando Romero and Christopher Self carried out one of the most violent crime sprees in California history. Joined by at least 2 accomplices, the pair conducted carjackings, burglaries, robberies, assaults, and even murders in Riverside County. During a routine helicopter patrol one day, police saw the murdered remains of best friends Joey Mans and Timothy Kip Jones. Both victims were shot to death. 6 weeks later, A third victim, Jose Aragon, was found dead in his truck from gunshot wounds. A few days after that, an off-duty law enforcement officer named John Feltenberger was robbed, carjacked, and shot. He survived the attack. Law enforcement failed to connect Romero and Self's crimes and investigated each incident as its own, until more than a month into their campaign of terror. After Aragon's murder, investigators obtained ATM surveillance footage of a man using the deceased's debit card. They questioned the individual, Jose Munoz, who implicated the men as the prime suspects. Detectives also connected Munoz, Romero, Self, and a fourth co-conspirator to the other crimes. Authorities charged Romero and Self with capital murder and more. Munoz, who had an extensive criminal history, testified against the siblings in exchange for 51 years to life for his role in the crime spree. Both Romero and Self were convicted of the murders and were given the death sentence. Romero died from COVID in 2020, and Self still remains on death row. Executions in California have been on hold since Governor Gavin Newsom imposed a moratorium on the death penalty in 2019. And only time will tell whether Self will languish in prison for the rest of his life or be put to death. Thanks for watching. Would you rather help your killer sibling hide a body or turn them in to face the consequences? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe. See you next time.